Awesome. So, folks, welcome to another episode of Better You. I'm your host, Neeraj, and today I'm very excited to bring a guest speaker. His name is Roy Hasson from Upsolver. Little context: Roy and I we met a few years ago. One of my previous startups I was working with, which was on data governance side. Roy was in AWS. He was a product manager for lake formation side. So Roy and I, we ended up collaborating more on the data governance. Roy moved on, I moved on, and but we stayed in touch. And this is how I ended up talking to Roy again. That hey, we should come on this episode and talk about Roy's what he's doing nowadays, and then a second piece of the episode where we're going to talk about cloud data strategies, and the third piece of the episode where we're going to talk about the future of cloud data strategies. So Roy, again, very excited to have you here. Let's start with your introduction and let's make it fun.
Yeah, sure. I will try to make it fun. Maybe some hand puppets. No, so like you said, my name is Roy Hasson. I'm the VP of Product at Upsolver. Been with them for 2.5 years or so, coming up on 3 years. As you said, we met at AWS. I was there for about 6 years in different roles. But if we kind of take a step back to kind of where I started, I actually started in the service provider space. So out of college, I had a short stint with Cisco, and then I moved to Comcast down in Philadelphia, big cable company in the U.S. If you're listening from outside the U.S., I worked there on a few strategic projects, which is something that really, really got me excited, kind of tying back to the cloud strategy idea. So the first ever cable modem network, what everybody has in their house today, cable modems connect to the cable network, give you internet access. So I worked on that first system that Comcast developed with a bunch of vendors and then deployed it into the field. And eventually that became Comcast Xfinity and some of these other services. Same thing with the voice over IP. So be able to make phone calls through your cable network at home. That's something that I worked on early on. Not many people know that history. But that was awesome. That was something that I really, really enjoyed because it sort of looked into the future and it's like, this is really where people want to be. These are the big problems we need to solve. And during that time, like my manager, super, super awesome guy, kind of had that vision. He had the ability to look at these problems that exist today and say, like, we need to go do that. And let's go do that. Let's go figure it out. And that's what really drove these two massive projects that we work on that ultimately turn into really, really big businesses for cable and eventually became Verizon Fios and AT&T Fiber and all those things. It all came from that space. So I spent about, I would say probably like 10, 12 years or so in the cable space. Worked for Motorola, worked for other companies. And then I got to a point where it was just enough. Like I didn't want to keep doing it. It was the same thing. The technology wasn't really innovating. It was kind of like incrementally evolving, just like the CPU or the GPU war. You get like 286 and 386 and 586, and it felt like the same thing. So I needed something different. Started looking for developer jobs. I've been writing code for all of my life, but I'm like, let's go do something. I really want to build. I really want to try something. I got some web development stuff. I kind of looked at it. It's like, really wasn't exciting enough. And then the opportunity to work for AWS came around. And that's when I said, like, I need to go do this. Honestly, I knew AWS a little bit. I played with it a little bit, but wasn't enough. But I said, screw it. I'm doing it. Spun up, free account, played with it, built a bunch of stuff as much as I could. This is back in like 2015, so there weren't as many services on AWS. It was a little bit easier to get a hold of what's going on. Did the interview, got the job, and then I started my first year there was a TAM, technical account manager. So think of it as like a post-sales support engineer that help customers kind of like plug things in and configure and run stuff. So if you don't know how to set up S3 or an EC2 or Lambda or whatever, we would jump in and do it. So we did a lot of the grunt work. It was awesome. I did it for a year. But then I really want to kind of go back to like the roots of data and do that. And thankfully, I had the opportunity to work with a bunch of financial services companies that were doing a ton with data. And I got to be able to build data platforms with them and kind of sit there in the architecture review meetings and the internal discussions and really understand kind of the challenges and the pros and cons of different design patterns, and having access to a very, very large customer base of AWS, also a very large engineering base, I guess, within AWS, was for me was the game changer, because it opened up so many doors and so many opportunities for me to go ask questions and to learn new things and to try new things. Um, so I worked with thousands of companies, literally thousands of companies, from small startups to 3-4 person companies to multinationals to governments. Um, and it was just very, very eye opening. So it gave me a lot of perspective, and
Yeah.
I've sort of, maintained a lot of these relationships over the years, and keeping my eyes open all the time, trying to kind of understand what a company is doing, why they're making those decisions, asking questions, you know, poking holes a little bit, like saying like, no, I think you did it this way. And then like getting people to talk. I'm like, no, we didn't really do it this way. Let me correct you. I'm like, okay, perfect. Correct me. So it was good.
So yeah, so Roy, it says very exciting journey. So you went from the hardware focused companies to, as you mentioned, more on the
Yeah.
web development, and then you suddenly saw that data space is evolving. Then you got into the data space, and this is actually a very good segue for our next segment of our episode. So as you and I we met, we were I was working on the data governance aspect for a cloud native data services, or another
Yeah.
data platform company, and then we got introduced. You and I, we started working on some lake formation integration, and so I think I'm very curious to understand, how did you go from the data to this security aspect in AWS, and then that takes us to the next segment of the episode. As part of the cloud data strategies, security and
Yeah.
governance plays a huge role too.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no short answer, but the shorter answer is that, like I said, AWS is a forcing function, because you have a lot of customers that are constantly asking you for things. You have a lot of customers who have different sets of requirements that will spend the time with you to really explain what they need, why they need it, how does it work today, what doesn't work for them in the current implementation. So you get exposed to just a lot of requirements and a lot of different perspectives on these problems. And eventually you're able to kind of take a look at this whole thing and filter it down to like, here's a set of problems that are common across all these customers, and then be able to have internal conversations with AWS folks, but also with customers about what technologies have you tried? What have you done? So a lot of companies, the bigger ones, have tried to build stuff on their own. They went to vendors. Then I would go to the vendor and say, hey, what are you doing? Right? How are you doing it? Can you explain? Digging deep, building these solutions on your own. The open source is really, really awesome, like Apache Ranger and Spark and Hive and all these things. Like you can do it on your own and start picking at it and see like, okay, this is the problem this one customer was telling me about, and this is why they can't solve this problem. And eventually it kind of started doing more and more of this. So for me, the path was Amazon EMR with Spark. Then I went over to Amazon Athena with Presto, and I was supporting those engines. And then I went over to Glue, which was initially in a serverless ETL service, plus a Metastore, like a Glue data catalog, which is a compatible catalog to Hive. And then I switched to Lake Formation. So I had a lot of that experience, built up about the needs of writing engines, the need of query engines, the need of catalogs, and some of the gaps within those spaces. So layering the security on top of that stack I already understood wasn't very big. Now, I will say that typically when you talk to people, when they say governance, it's a massive space. So for me, I in the beginning I struggled to get my arms around what is governance and what are all the different pieces. But very quickly I realized that most of the time when people talk about governance, it's auditing and lineage. it's access controls, right? Those are the primary ones, right? So if I didn't understood those and I start diving deeper into each one of those areas, what are solutions on the market? What do they do? What do they don't do? Asking customers, hey, did you look at this particular solution? Why does it not work for you? Oh yeah, we tried this. We try to configure it, but it doesn't quite work the way we want because it works in a certain way and blah blah blah. Right. So you start to pick at those things and you kind of get an idea or a perspective of what's available, and that ultimately built my perspective and my knowledge base on governance, access security, the core capabilities. Now, there's lots of governance stuff I don't understand, and I don't claim to to understand. But when it comes to access controls and entitlements, and things like that, then I can go very very deep.
Yeah. As you know, I was part of the governance company too, and the you said it really well. And I used to the way I explain to my customers that is there are three pillars as part of the data governance. You have a data identification, data
Right.
classification. Second pillar, as the tags comes out of the classification, comes out of the data discovery. Your second pillar is, as you said, data access management. How can I do role-based access control or attribute-based access control? And the third pillar is a data protection, which is data encryption at rest at the attribute level. So once you put together all this pillar, you're ready to take the next level of the conversation or next level of your transformation as part of your data platform, which is getting to
Yeah.
cloud. Because you were at AWS, you witnessed it. There's so many big companies, enterprises, under your leadership was trying to get into cloud, and you were trying to help them as part of your security and governance
That's
story.
right. That's right. And I think
Yeah.
the important part to understand is that when it comes to governance, in particular data governance, there isn't a single solution. Like you can't just throw up a solution at it and say, boom, all my check boxes are checked. Right? There are many, many layers. And when it's about going from the on-prem environment and moving to the cloud, the biggest challenge that I've come across is basically parsing through all these layers of complexity that companies have built over the years and be able to say like, hey, we're going to build this layer first, right? Let's focus on this one layer. Let's call this access controls, right? You simply need RBAC for your data, and you're using, let's just say, Athena with Presto, and let's just focus on this, right? Yes, you have all these other things, but let's just focus on this. And then once we have that established, we can start layering the other stuff. And when you get to that, you a lot of times say like, well, we kind of put this layer in here like 10 years ago. We don't really need this. All we really need is an audit log, right? We don't need a whole tool that will generate these reports and these lineages and things like that. Like, just send me an email at the end of the month with a document that said this is my audit report for data access to particular data sets. That's all I really care about, right? So you can simplify things as you move to the cloud. Now, a lot of the tools that exist on prem do also exist in the cloud. And those are vendors that have been in the market for a long time. So those are making it a little bit easier to say, well, it's configured here on-prem. The underlying layers on the on-prem, like access controls and enforcing entitlements and those kind of things, they're going to be different. But these governance tools, kind of the reporting and the UI and the workflow engines, like those things, you can simply just carry them over to the cloud because they work in both places. And they've done a good job over the years of implementing some of these new hooks to be able to talk to the lake formations or the Apache Rangers of the world or whatever that may be, to push down policies as you create workflows to onboard a new user or to onboard a new data set or something like that. Um, so I,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So right. So security governance is the pillar of your journey or a customer's journey towards the cloud. In addition to that, if we switch gears towards more like data
Mhm.
services now, you mentioned Athena, you mentioned EMR, you mentioned multiple other Redshift, and so on. If we stay on track of this cloud native data services, based on your experience, where are you seeing more challenges and the value that customers are
Yeah.
getting?
So I think that's a really interesting question because there's a lot of aspects to it. I think what you're seeing happening slowly, or maybe faster than slowly, is kind of the decomposition of the traditional monolith data platform, right? We can argue all day whether ETL is better than ELT or ELT is better than ETL. At the end of the day, what what companies need to do is to be able to move fast, right? Be able to scale to whatever ultimate scale they're going to need. So today they have 10 customers, tomorrow they're going to have a million customers, right? You don't want to have to redesign your platform every year because you're adding new customers, right? So move quickly to build new use cases, scale, to meet business needs, and then do it in a cost effective way, right? And then the last one I would say, do it in a way that's open and easy for you to innovate and add more capabilities into the future. So for that, what we're seeing is we're seeing kind of the decomposition of the platform where the storage layer, it just becomes this utility, right? Object store is available everywhere. Those interfaces are ubiquitous, right? So any tool that you have today on the market knows how to talk to S3 or GCS or ADLS or any of those stores, right? So that just becomes this default storage layer, and it's fast, right? Whether not for all use cases, probably for majority of use cases, it is fast and reliable enough to get as much as you want done. And then on top of that, you kind of have these compute. Now, these compute are starting to kind of decouple as well. And where we're seeing much of the conversation today is around the storage of the data. So like open file formats, open table formats like Iceberg, etc. But I think that's simple conversation, right? The more interesting conversation comes in at the catalog layer, right? And this is where we're seeing some of the discussions around how do I decouple the metadata layer away from the monolith data platform engine, whether it's Databricks or Snowflake or whoever, right? I want to decouple that because ultimately that's where you end up putting a lot of the business logic, right? So the data was the hard part, right? Because I don't want to copy data from one place to the other. It's in one place. Well, we solved that problem with object stores and table formats. The next layer now is metadata and governance, right? Security, right? So now that we're at this metadata layer, icebergs and the like help us decouple that as well, make it easier to access. But these catalogs now are saying, hey, whether you query the data from Redshift or Snowflake or Databricks or Presto or Trino or whatever, where do I define my policy? Where do I define the access controls? How do I enforce them? How do I make sure that it's actually enforced based on what's been defined? Right? That's still very nebulous, right? It's like some things work, some things don't quite work. There's really differences between them. And from your previous company, right? It's not an easy conversation because you're technically taking
Yeah,
these policies and you're pushing them down to a third party query engine and you basically pray that they're going to do the right thing. And if they don't, whose responsibility is it, right? The policy manager or
absolutely.
the
Yeah,
policy enforcing engine, right?
yeah,
So I think that's
yeah,
ultimately where we're going to see the challenge or kind of the conversation coming in, and how do we solve that problem. Iceberg and the like are starting to address that. The open catalog movement that Iceberg initiated with the Iceberg REST catalog specification is now starting to think about, hey, how do we incorporate policy control, access controls into this layer so it becomes a standard layer across the board. And whether it's lake formation pushing policies or whoever, doesn't matter. It just becomes the standard layer. Because if you move from Snowflake to Redshift to whatever the next big thing is going to be, well, your policies are probably the hardest thing to move at this point because data is in this three. You don't
absolutely.
have to worry about it. Metadata is in a catalog. It's easy. It's decoupled. Now, policies are going to be very hard to move. And you know, right, migrating from on-prem to the cloud, how much
Yeah,
effort and time it took to convert policies from one language to another and make sure they work and make sure, well, but you can do role level security here, but you can't do it here. So what do you do? How do you solve that problem, right? There's just a lot of
yeah,
nuance
yeah,
there that we're now starting to think about in this open decoupled architecture. But I really think that's the future. That's really where we're going. This is just a bump in the road, something we're going to have to fix. But ultimately, that's what's going to happen. I remember I posted
Yeah.
on LinkedIn a while ago that companies used to change their data platforms every 15 years back in like the 90s and the early 2000s. Nowadays, companies are changing their data platforms like every 2 years, right? And think about it. When you migrate one to
Yeah.
the other,
And I
it's a lot of
think,
work.
yeah, and I think that might be, and this is actually I wanted to ask you, and maybe we can take a one step back on this conversation. That might be that might be because of the confusion that product companies and overall the how fast the industry is moving because of the Gen AI and AI initiatives. Today, if you look at right, and Databricks guys are there, Snowflake is there, and Redshift, BigQuery, ADLS, Azure folks, they are trying to build their own Fabric piece and Synapse piece. Now, let's say I'm a CIO, CTO of any big enterprise organization. Now I made the investment on, let's say, Databricks. Suddenly, my IT team is asking for Snowflake because of whatever reason, performance and use case. I won't say performance, more about a use case. And then there is another silo IT or shadow IT is asking me for BigQuery, and then somebody's asking me for Redshift. If you notice here, right, there's so much confusion. And I think this is where I want to elevate this
Mhm.
conversation a little bit more. How do you see this confusion coming into the picture, and how are you guys
Yeah.
solving that?
So the confusion is always going to be there because it's a horse race, right? All these vendors are basically vying for first place position and are trying to innovate in a lot of different ways. Ultimately, it comes down to all these vendors are kind of doing the same thing and are solving the same thing, and for the most part have the same features, right? Now you can argue about performance and scale and stuff, and that really only matters in probably 5% of the companies in the world, right? Like not everybody has a petabyte of data in BigQuery that needs super fast query latency, right? So, for majority of cases, that 10% difference performance, that doesn't really make a difference. It's your dashboard, right? um, I think the way people need to think about it is really about where is their data, right? Is their data generated in AWS because I don't know, that's where their partners are, that's where the application servers are? Is it generated there, right? Or is it on GCP or wherever, right? The next thing is kind of like, what do you want to do with the data today, and then what are you thinking you're going to need from this data in the future, as far as you can tell, right? Lots of things will change, but you should have a perspective of where you want to go, right? That's your product roadmap. Um, and whether that cloud platform has the right set of tools to be able to serve what you're going to need, right? Now, the next conversation is, well, what set of tools do I want to choose? But before you get to the set of tools, you need to think about, what should my data platform be, right? What should that be? Ultimately, if you're a small company, you're just starting up, a platform is not really a thing for you. You just get Snowflake, load stuff in, run queries, you're good. But as you start growing, you need to do more with the data. So simply buying Snowflake may not be enough, right? You may need to think about, well, I have Python users who want to do more with the data. Does Snowflake offer that? In this case, it does, right? You can use Snowpark or whatever to work with it. So you need to kind of think about, who are my users? What do they want to do with the data today? How they want to work with it? What are some of the things they would want to do with it later? And ultimately build a platform that gives you that flexibility, but also allows you to expand and to grow as you move forward, right? And this goes back to what I said before about the decoupled platform, where if you export that data and you say, put it in, let's say, an object store, I call it shared storage, where it's an object store in Parquet format with an iceberg table format on top of that. That's kind of ubiquitous, and it's going to become more and more ubiquitous in the coming years. So whether you're using Spark or DuckDB or Trino or whatever, they're all accessing the same thing. So you don't have to replicate data. You don't have to make copies in different places. You can do cross account. If you want to do cross account replication from S3, you can do it, right? So the data access is very, very easy, right? At that point, you can bring your tools, right? The next question comes in, well, how do I find data sets? How do I secure data sets, right? Those are the conversations we had a little bit earlier. But we're solving those problems. Now you can say, look, I don't have time. I don't want to wait. I'm going to shove everything in Snowflake and I'm happy. That's fine. That's great. But you may come back
Yeah.
in a year from now and say, Snowflake's too expensive for me, or Snowflake doesn't do the things I want to do. Like I really want this Gen AI model and they don't have it. They don't support it, but I really, really need it. So what are you going to do now? You have to export the data out. Now
Yeah.
you're back to the same problem, right? We've gone through
Yeah.
this many, many years ago where, people started with Teradata and Netezza and all those, and like, well, I want to move to the next gen thing, but I can't because my data is locked, my policies are locked, my, functions, everything is locked away in this thing. Migration, as you know, it takes years, especially for big companies. It takes a long, long time, and you're almost never done with it. Um,
Yeah, that's a huge investment. And the next conversation always comes up is ROI. If somebody spent $1 million with whoever the data platform, whatever data platform they
yeah,
chose, they eventually they have to show the
yeah,
ROI. You have to release the data products faster, and then you have to make sure you are enabling more users in your enterprise, in your organization, to handle more use cases
yeah,
faster, right? So, Roy, I think that takes us to the final segment of the episode. Oh, sure, we are here, Iceberg, Delta, all these different file formats, storages, and so on. You talked about S3, ADLS, GCS. We talked about various data services. Now the question is, what's next?
yeah,
We may not know the answer, right? But the way Gen AI use cases are popping up, and of course, as of now, none of the use cases are in production. They are in POC stage or maybe in the pilot stage max. Where do you see the landscape of this data platforms going towards, and where do you see the cloud offerings of all these
yeah.
hyperscalers are coming into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and obviously different people will take it in different directions. Um, for me, it's really about acceleration, right? And what does acceleration mean? Acceleration means now I'm generating a lot more data faster. I need to consume all the data faster, right? And I need to be able to derive insights or produce some value with the data faster. So the way I kind of view the probably the next 5+ years is just it's all about acceleration. Like what technologies are we building to be able to drive that acceleration, continue to accelerate the value to the user? Because ultimately, users want more value faster. They don't want to wait for things. They nobody's patient anymore, right? Whether it's a short video clip or quick recommendation, or I'm going here, like I already arrived, tell me what restaurant I want to be. Like everybody wants an answer faster. Everybody wants to move faster. So for me, acceleration is really the trend and kind of the wave that we're all riding. And then what does that mean from a technology perspective? I think there's a lot of aspects to it. At a high level, I think storage, all the data sort of moving down to the storage layer to the object store is an acceleration sort of lever, because what you're starting to see more and more now, and Absolver has been doing this for like 8+ years, but more and more companies and solutions and technology, including open source, are leveraging the object store as their store, right? So no longer do they have to go and build and design their own databases and integrate with backend databases. No, they just like dump everything in S3. It's fast enough. We know how to partition data. We know how to handle it. Just go, right? So that sort of cuts that development effort almost in half. And now they're focusing on delivering value in the database or in the engine or whatever. The other aspect is from a data movement perspective and transformations, we're starting to see the adoption of streaming capabilities as kind of the de facto, right? Up until now, we've been doing everything batch. It's easier. It's easier for us to handle it mentally. This thing starts running, it ends. If it broke, I run it again. Streaming is a lot harder because what does this mean? Like if it broke, do I have to start? Like what did I miss? It just gets more complicated. But our technology is really abstracting all that away now, like Flink. Absolver is doing a fantastic job at abstracting that complexity away. So for me, I see streaming just becoming a natural evolution of how we move data into systems and out of systems, whether that's into Iceberg, into storage, or whether that's into Snowflake or into whoever, whatever other database. It just, everything is a stream. Everything sort of connects together and is a stream. And ultimately, that's how we accelerate the movement of data from the application side to the analytics side to the AI side. The third sort of layer that I'm seeing that's going to help drive that acceleration is kind of the containerization, for the lack of a better term, of applications, where I can sort of say, like, I want to run this Gen AI model, or I want to run this analytics calculation for a particular report I want to do. Like, I don't need to buy Tableau to run reports. I can launch this container, and that container has my SQL application in it, and that's ultimately going to just run, right? And now we're starting to see this with Snowflake Container Service, right? We're starting to see this with in Absolver. I was talking to you offline about this, but we have this idea of Iceberg Live Tables, where it's basically it's a declarative SQL pipeline. You just write a piece of SQL that does some transformation, and then we continuously transform that data as it's flowing through in real time. And then you get the output, and the output is either a table, Iceberg table you can query. You can expose it via APIs if you want to pull it into your UI and your application. A lot of different ways to consume it. But that's ultimately how I see it, is that you kind of containerize your application code, whether that's, again, a Gen AI model you're trying to train, or a Gen AI prediction or summarization app, or whatever. Now you deploy that application onto your preferred cloud stack, Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery, Redshift, whatever. And then it just goes in, it runs a query, and then it's all turtles downhill, right? It's all the same sort
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
decoupled layer. So I can run that on top of anything I want, and that's my application now becomes much more portable. Now, we're not there yet,
You know
but it's,
the
in my opinion, that's the
yeah
next 5 years.
the reason I'm smiling because it reminds me of old days of Mesosphere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
We had this
yeah,
technology. You can package all the applications. Just click on the app, and it will just do the whole initialization for you, and you can
yeah.
just process your stuff, and you get out,
Yeah.
and then you
Yeah.
shut down the container.
And you
Beautiful.
can
Yeah,
start to see it. Databricks started this a couple years ago when they let you take Jupyter notebooks and deploy them as jobs,
yeah,
right? So you can just take the notebook, you wrote everything in it, you did everything you want, just deploy it, and it just runs, right? Snowflake with their
yeah,
container service, you can run applications that are just, they're SQL queries, right? But they also have UI. You can also expose the results in a nice UI. We're going to get more and more of that. And I always say this, like, technology
yeah.
is a pendulum. We swing from one side to the other every couple of years, but really all we're doing is, we don't really inventing anything breaking new. We're just keep polishing, right? Keep improving, keep getting better, right? We were doing data lakes, 4 years ago, and then the pendulum swung. Snowflake came out, was super super easy, but it didn't really do anything brand new or earth shattering that we didn't do before. It was easier, it was faster, a little bit cheaper, right? Didn't have to do a lot of management. But now we're sort of swinging back, and we're saying, well, okay, it's cool, but there's still limitations to it, which we've known for 20 years, that data warehouse doesn't solve all the problems. Now we're swinging back, and we're saying, well, data lakes weren't great enough because there's all these challenges. Well, now if we layer these lakehouse formats like Iceberg on top, it does away with some of these challenges. How do I compact data? How do I optimize it? How do I partition? It's all handled for you, right? So we're going to make this swing again in a couple of years, but ultimately I think we're all marching towards, how do I add value to my users faster? And in each layer of the architecture cake, we're going to keep improving and optimizing, but ultimately focusing on the near real time, the real time aspects of the data.
Very nice, Roy. I'm so glad we were able to talk about you and your journey in the cloud point of view, and then we were able to talk about the what's happening in as part of the cloud data services, data platform, and so on. So glad that we talked about the
Yeah.
future. It's very listening to this. It's very clear that we don't. we in the sense, not you and me, but overall industry does not have a clear
Yeah.
vision on what to use, where to use. Yes, there's a confusion. I think eventually, as Gen AI space settles down, the confusion will go away because, as you were saying, 3 years ago everybody was talking about machine learning. Now everybody's talking about Gen AI.
I don't think the
So,
confusion honestly is going to
right,
go away. I think we're just going to find the next shiny object to chase after.
exactly.
Like I said, it's a horse race, so there's always going to be something new, something exciting to talk about. The advice I always give people, honestly, is stay in your lane. Like keep an eye on things, but stay in your lane. Like understand what your objective is. What do you need to do? What is the easiest, most cost-effective way for you to get there? And can you maintain this over a course of time? And right, that's kind of what you want to do, and then deliver the value and then expand from there. I see all the time people are like, oh, but I want to use this and I want to use this and I have to use DuckDB because it's small data. Small data is awesome. Like doesn't matter, right? Like, does it solve your problem? Yes or no? Like if it doesn't solve your problem, then you just wasted months dealing with something that's not going to help you, right? Go focus on something else,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I would always say, like, stay in
yeah,
your lane. Don't get distracted by all the shiny objects. They're always going to be there.
yeah. Easy and
Yeah,
simple, right? Keep it
hopefully,
simple. Yes.
been successful for me at least.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah. Right. Thank you so much. So glad that we were able to do this. And whenever you're in San Francisco, let's hang out.
Definitely. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Folks, thank you so much for listening. And please don't forget to subscribe. I will be back with another cool episode the way it just happened here.
Awesome. Looking
Cool.
forward to it.
Yeah.